Hello, everyone. I'm Father Tom, the priest in charge at Trinity, and we're pleased to host this Living Wisely and Well series again this year. And so we welcome members of the community, and we welcome our guest, or well, shall we call you a guest speaker? You're a member of Trinity. She's a guest tonight, I guess, right? Right, yes. Celia Tosh. So yeah, thank you. We look forward to your presentation, and again, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. If you haven't been here in this church before, there are restrooms out that door if you are interested. But we would prefer, because of the cables on the floor, that maybe it's safer to go around that way on the outside. So welcome to this 2024 Living Wisely and Well Fall Series, Buildings for a Sustainable Future. We all know that buildings the construction of our buildings contribute about 37% of the global carbon emissions. But new ways of building and new ideas for reducing those emissions are always coming. And tonight we're going to hear about a very exciting one. And I just wanted to quickly say that next week we will have a presentation that's been put together by Shirley McCarthy, who is the chair of the Branford Clean Energy Committee. And they have been working very hard to make sure that new town construction for the town of Branford takes advantage of all of these new sustainable techniques and ideas. And so we're really looking forward to hearing about what's happening in Branford next week. Next week. And 2 weeks from now, we will focus on the Living Village, which is a groundbreaking new residential facility at Yale Divinity School. We had hoped to welcome Dean Gregory Sterling to give this presentation. Unfortunately, he had to schedule surgery that day, but he is sending the project manager for the Living Village, who will probably even have more details about how this thing is being put together. But his name is Bruce McCann, and he will be with us 2 weeks from tonight. So that's a quick overview of the series. We hope you will join us for as many as you can, if not in person, by live stream. And we want to welcome our live stream audience. It's often bigger than our in-person audience. And thanks to Angela Ruggiero for being our live streamer. She's been doing this. This is her third series that she's offered to do this, and we're so grateful. And to Ann, who's our Ann Freeman, who keeps us all connected and running technologically. So thank you, Ann. So without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker for tonight. Celia Tosh is a leader in sustainable design, current construction technologies, a designer of innovative spaces, and an award-winning researcher. During her time at Pelly Clark and Partners, she was the design team leader in programming an innovative facility to converge the engineering and the performing art disciplines at Old Dominion University. She was the project manager for the Schuylkill Yards master plan and was the design team Peter, can you hold my papers? Can you do this? My mouth is very dry.
Okay.
There you go.
Let's see. Where did you stop, sweetheart?
Right.
She was the project manager for the Schuylkill Yards master plan and was the design team project manager for Hackley School, Center of Creative Arts and Technology, blending the computer sciences with performance and visual arts. Hackley is in Tarrytown, New York? Yep. Celia is the primary investigator leading a team of researchers studying equity in climate change, to help vulnerable communities face extreme heat with locally available and affordable technologies. Her work is part of an award grant from the Yale Planetary Solutions Center on Climate Change, and the Three Cairns Group Climate Impact Innovation Fund. The work includes a holistic approach, which includes the Yale School of Public Health and a team of TEC, Tech de Monterrey. Also at PCNP, Celia was the design team leader for Torre Mítica, the tallest building in Mexico City, winning the Best of Americas by the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. She recently completed the construction of the Stony Brook University MART, M-A-R-T building and Children's Hospital and the FMC Tower. Her work includes the Arsht Center for the Performing Arts, where she was a key member of the team from pre-design through opening, the Catherine Drexel Chapel for Xavier University, and many of the firm's performing arts and master planning efforts. How in the world she has time to do all this, I have no idea. Celia is a member of the global faculty at Instituto Tecnológico de Monterrey, Mexico City campus, and delivered the commencement address for the campus's architecture school class of 2024. She's lectured at the United Nations campus in Panama City of Knowledge, Universidad del Istmo, on sustainable design practices for equity in climate change. She's a visiting lecturer at the Universidad Católica de Bogotá School of Architecture. She delivered the keynote address at MIND, Mexico Innovation and Design. She is a LEED LEED accredited professional, an associate member of the AIA, and a member of the Society of College and University Planners. Volunteering in the community is important to Celia as part of her life-work balance. She serves on the boards of 2 nonprofit organizations, volunteers with her daughter's scout troop, and has dedicated time in the vestry of Trinity Episcopal Church. Yay! Which is where we find ourselves this evening. We are honored to have Celia as the keynote presenter of this year's Living Wisely and Well series. Thank you so much for giving us the time that you devote to so many other causes, Celia.
Well, yay. Can you hear me? Good. Thank you for having me here. This is really part 1 of explaining the whole project, so you're going to be kind of eager to know what happens this semester. But this project really started from considering 3 major things that are going on the planet right now. One is the population growth, what's happening in remote parts of the world. I was born in El Salvador, and I traveled to all sorts of Latin American countries, Asia, and other places for work. And there is a universal set of conditions that are impacting us and communities all over the world. The other the other kind of global factor that influenced my applying for this grant was the sense of extreme heat, and how a lot of these communities in remote areas, without infrastructure, no electricity, no way of affording other methods of cooling their dwellings, and really learning and living and growing in that environment came to really the forefront. And then concerns about just the overall chronic conditions of extreme heat. Deforestation being a major cause for a lot of these communities that really can't face climate change in an equitable way. And as an architect, we often talk about the housing crisis. The World Green Building Council estimates that we have to build 96,000 new affordable homes every day to meet the deficit. Every day. And so putting these things together really brought to light some of the things that give us hope, right? How can we impact this? As educators, as community builders, as just general global citizens, trying to find a solution. One of the things that really struck me was how great the percentage of self-built structures there are. I know we make a living in architecture, I'm looking above, and we really often fail to consider, wait a minute, most of the world's structures are not built by or designed by architects. They're self-builders. They're people trying to make do, especially in these communities. And so figuring out how to impact that whole segment of the construction industry, like you pointed out earlier, it's a huge percentage of the footprint of the carbon that we're trying to deal with. And so taking advantage of that, we say, how can we impact that in a passive way, in a low cost, affordable, and accessible way, and with equity. So, because so many of us are self-builders and we all sweat, I looked at a biophilic design, how to make your envelope sweat in a passive way. So passive cooling strategies, it is not without precedent, but one of the things that we noticed in a lot of the places that we're talking about, Asia, India, Latin America, in a lot of the South, people build with brick. And there's an inherent cavity to when you fire a brick. You have to have an opening so that steam can be released and the brick module doesn't crack. So there's an inherent quality, and they use bricks all over the world. It requires often in places no local power. They fire these in self-built ovens. And what is going on recently in a lot of Latin American places, certainly in Mexico where I'm working with the university, is they're starting to use other methods for agriculture that also don't require electrical feed or irrigation infrastructure, that are more passive irrigation technologies. So looking at those two things, low impact on infrastructure, already accessible new materials, finding a way of combining that, but approaching this problem with a sense of dignity and respect for the local cultures and how they're building. Yes, they're all using brick. Yes, a lot of the brick is self-made, it's fired in your own backyard, but we need to learn and respect and approach every local region and how they do it, right? We can't just show up and say, this is how we should change. And so starting from a point of understanding what is going on locally was also important to us. So we said, let's see if we can combine hydrogel with the brick construction technologies and cooling the walls of the buildings for these communities in a passive way. Just like you're sweating. When you sweat, you cool yourself off. We thought that it would be important to say, both to the Yale funders and to the group of investigators, that the end product, whatever we arrived at, would have to be released open source. We can't find something amazing that works, that is affordable and accessible and will be able to be applied in all over the world, but then it's patented, or you can't release it because you can't buy it. So one of the qualifications for the work we're doing is to say, this is open source. Thankfully, the university I'm working with, El Instituto Tecnológico de Monterrey, they have 27 campuses all over Mexico, and they have agreements with many other world universities, and so they happen to reach most of Mexico in remote places, in big cities all over the place, as well as places all over the world. So that was one thing that allowed us to say, how can we feasibly say this will be open source and we can communicate it to communities all over the place. They have been amazingly collaborative and opening avenues of connection to communities, especially in vulnerable and remote places, and they have opened the student body to understanding what it is we're doing. Now, the grant we won was to build 2 mock-ups to test this idea of combining brick, terracotta brick with hydrogel in a very dry and hot climate, and then the other one in a hot and humid place, just to make sure that we understood what the different implications were and whether we needed to make modifications. I was working with a former colleague and another professor at Yale, and she volunteered to approach the government of Jujuy, Argentina, where it is super hot, it's arid, it's desert-like, and they agreed to build 1 mock-up for us. The other climate was going to be in Mexico City with the Institute, with the Tec de Monterrey. And that kind of covered our two strategies to make sure we were approaching this kind of in a realistic way. Now, we understood from the get-go that we were going to fail, that things were going to have to go in a circular pattern, and the iterative nature of research was going to have to dictate kind of the paths that we took. But we still started from a point of view of it has to be data-driven. We have to understand the kind of local materials people are using to build. Where do they get the earth to make their bricks? How do they bring the mud? What kind of makeup is happening in these places? And then understanding what kind of cavity has is prevalent in these areas. And then to make sure that we understood how the community was open to collaborating with someone from outside. Because that piece was important to me. I think we have to really look at it as a collaborative effort as we're approaching a community with a need, but really finding a way that they are learning to help themselves and teaching us in turn how it is that would work best for them. So the issue of refinement methods really has that idea embedded in it. Now, we didn't invent this. This is happening in many different places. There is at the Institute for Advanced Architecture in Catalonia, they are already testing how to design. This is a bespoke tile that has high technology. It's 3D printed and has really expensive footprint that is out of reach for a lot of our communities that we're considering with. However, important things that came out of their study was the fact that the technology is feasible and it can lower the temperature of a building as much as 5 degrees centigrade. This is just in the laboratory tests. That's about 9 degrees Fahrenheit. And so we thought, all right, it's promising. Let's figure out how we can test that. There's many different ways to do evaporative cooling. Evaporative cooling is like sweating, but in some places where it's a swamp, it's harder to get the evaporative effect going on. And so we started to make sure we covered all the different possibilities for evaporative cooling that could be there. Our students really work, you're gonna meet them in a second, really work to understand what we didn't want to do. And this is the high-tech version of evaporative coolers that are being built with terracotta. It's printed, 3D printed terracotta. It's high-tech, I don't know how data-driven these are, but I'm sure part of the research that we've seen, they actually do work in minimizing heat in the structures. There's an issue with the water resources and how clean the water for some of these really high-tech modules needs to be. So we kind of understanding what is going on and definitely realizing this couldn't work in our remote communities that we're trying to help. Now, a little bit about hydrogel. Who has children? I know I have a kid, but she always played with these Orbeez, you know, your grandchildren might have played with them. Orbeez are ubiquitous. They're using them right now for the garment industry. They use them in diapers. They use them in water wicking fabric. They're using them to pack materials because they're low impact in many other places. And like I mentioned earlier, in agriculture. It has very minimal infrastructure requirements for irrigation, and it is pretty much accessible. Even in the remote area where we are working, you can obtain agriculture grade hydrogel. It is also used in medicine. They're growing all sorts of things in hydrogel and combining hydrogel to create all sorts of biological implants and transplants. So we also were interested in where's the range beyond the hydrogel and the passive cooling. What are people building with terracotta as well? So again, there's very high tech and out of affordable reach for most communities, although this had a lot of interesting stuff for us, because as you start to look at 3D printed modular stuff, it is becoming more and more affordable. It is becoming more prevalent. Blackstone Library has a 3D printer, so it's, it's not too far from us, but in a lot of the communities we visited, it was not feasible. So we're back to how people build locally and what kind of things do. We also want to make sure that we maximize the knowledge of just how you're putting stuff together without really changing anything else. How do you put it together? And self-shading is one of the things that we're trying to teach people. You're already building with bricks, these are off the shelf, and then just how you compose them, how you stack one on top of another. The upper brick can put shade on the bottom brick, and that already brings down the temperature of that wall. So we're incorporating things that are already kind of what we call low-hanging fruit to help passive cool some of the structures. And here you can see that it's just about stacking and rotating, and it still maintains the structural integrity of the wall. So a lot of these things we're already collaborating with the community on. Now this is the meat of my work. We, again, are looking at how do we stack these things, how do we charge the hydrogel. The students wanted to do the 3D thing. How do we make the 3D thing affordable, right? A lot of the studies that we're doing include three key components. In order to really say this works to lower the wall, we are building a 3D digital model. We call that the digital twin of the building that we will build in real world to test this. We create simulations in that digital model. We put in the local temperature, humidity, the orientation, and other terrain information, as well as vegetation and where shading or other adjacent structures are. That way we understand really what's going on in that microclimate of the thing we're building. And then we are including ideas into that 3D model to test how the water moves, how the building drains, how the wall drains, and where rainwater could be put in or not. So these are just different tests that the students put together. We discarded 95% of them because they're too expensive. So it was informative because once we went to the community was like, okay, this is not really feasible because the fabrication process is out of reach. But the whole process, and I showed you the whole spiral, going around in circles, the whole process really was about understanding access, implementation, and the lifespan and the integrity of the hydrogel. Now, hydrogel has a lifespan of 5 years. So what we have learned in the preliminary studies is that we have to have a way of replacing it. And this is not an alien issue for a lot of the vulnerable communities we visited, because people who build with mud, adobe, or thatch, they're constantly maintaining. There's a sense of we have to continue taking care of our structures. They didn't seem to have a problem with that when we spoke with them, so they just thought the issues with incorporating the hydrogel were not so much that they would have to replace it every 5 years, but that there may be the danger of people wanting to steal the hydrogel from your house. So making sure that we made it accessible, but not too accessible. So those were the things that, as collaborating with the community, you begin to understand, and that is a design driver down the line. We have built into the digital model also the idea that the entire south wall, which is the hottest wall, could be the one that provides kind of the cooling, and it starts to affect the whole structure. Now, a word about the scale of the structures. A lot of the places, you're not really trying to cool a building this size. They're very small, humble buildings. Even the schools are not giant spaces, and so cooling the major wall, the major heated wall, actually goes a long way toward cooling the entire structure. This is why we need to build a whole building, a whole room, and not just one wall, so that we understand what happens on the interior space and how that impacts the other 3 walls that are not exposed to the high heat. So we are still modeling and understanding the local climate, both in Mexico City and in the local community where we are building. Here's Mexico City up there, and we are building in a community called Hueyapan, which is down southeast of Mexico City. This is the major Popocatépetl volcano. They call it the Smoky because it smokes every day. Every day you can look from anywhere in the city and the volcano is like, has this plume. It's crazy when you visit. But anyway, this community has lived on the volcano skirt it was established in like 1564 or something. It's ancient, it's a syncretic community. They speak Nahuatl, most of them. They're of indigenous backgrounds. They're basically agricultural based. When you speak to them and you try to understand, okay, tell me what your awareness of context, your awareness of climate change, blow you away. One of the ladies told me 10 years ago the cows didn't get as fat. Now we have really obese cows and our cattle because the trees are growing so much more because there's so much more rain. And so much more rain has changed the kind of vegetation that we're able to grow. And so we can't grow some crops that used to feed and we used to sell, and now everything has changed. And they're aware of the whole intricate network of these changes that come from climate change. So in 2017, a huge earthquake came and disseminated the town. It was mostly adobe structures. 80 to 90% of the homes were destroyed. 30% of them could not be repaired, so they had to be rebuilt. And at that time, right after the earthquake, the town wasn't even incorporated to any municipality, so it had to be created a municipality so they could be eligible for federal work. And then there's a federal agency and other NGOs that have come in and helped to rebuild. So that already told us a lot of things. They're willing to work with an exterior entity. They're willing to learn new technologies. And they're willing to teach people and collaborate in improving kind of their building stock. So we encountered them. One of the things was really important for us to do was to understand the adobe construction and why adobe. This is Alma Delia. This is the lady who is allowing us to build in her home. But one of the things, one of the things that is very important to realize is that even though the government program said you have to rebuild one-to-one, so the 30% of houses that had to be rebuilt with adobe. And the community is saying absolutely not. The adobe is going to fail again. And even structures that have been rebuilt in the last 3 years already have cracking issues and have failed to provide a sense of security and improvement. If you can see, the corners are failing. And it has really very little to do with the soundness because they're bringing new building technology to the adobe. The engineers are calculating, they're figuring out how to buttress. It really has improved, but the community is still rejecting adobe. Instead, they're going to build with concrete block. And you see a lot of new houses built with CMU block all over the place. Now, one of the things we're trying to do is try to help them tell us why they're going to concrete block and not terracotta brick, but that is still a conversation that we're having. This is one of our professors. He's the person that has the liaison between the government program and the community, and he's on my team of faculty in the research team at Tec de Monterrey. So we just happened to all the worlds kind of collided, which was really great. And we have been allowed to really sit with the community as they rebuild some of the structures. Alma Delia has cancer, and so she has received a lot of other help. There's always a lot of people in the home and has quite a good lot where we are being allowed to build one of the mock-ups to test the terracotta with the hydrogel. Some of these are the builders and some of these are the other professors. And we're making sure that the students who participate in the research are also being raised as young architects with a worldview of respecting the local communities, understanding traditional building technologies, and really enriching their architectural language, because they're going to have this problem when they get out of school in 3 years. And one of the things I really stress to them is a sense of community. Not just a sense of the community we're trying to help, but a sense of us as architects and community builders and global citizens, and figuring out how we approach that relationship in a more nurturing way. So it's very important for us that they spend time with the community and on the site. And then it's very important for us to let them experience the actual building technology. Now, the community is rejecting Adobe, but we wanted to take advantage of the fact that they're learning, and they're learning the technology, and they're learning sound structural techniques with Adobe, to make sure that the students also learned that, even though we're not going to in the end build Adobe, but it was super important for us. And these are all tech students. Now, there are several institutions in Mexico City. La UNAM is the National Autonomous University. They are the largest and public university. Tec de Monterrey is what they call the Strawberry University, which is a private university, and all our kids are supposed to be the creme de la creme and absolutely spoiled, rotten kids. But when you get them out to the community, the reputation is unbelievably off. Like the students are way involved building and definitely creating with Adobe. It's an amazing place. They're very open and collaborative with not just the person in the site, but the entire building team, all the builders and the contractors showing up. And we are getting our hands and feet dirty, getting this work done. A lot more to think about as we continue is the second mock-up in Mexico City. The university has given us part of the parking lot to build the second mock-up in kind of an urban setting with a heat island effect, with other issues that are not the same considerations as we have in Guayapan. And so we also bring back whatever we're learning back to the classroom. We have a whole workshop allowed to us at Mexico City, but we also work here in New Haven at Yale, because it's a joint project. The students travel once or twice a semester. The School of Architecture has been very supportive in the kind of spaces and scheduling. They allow us to meet, as well as we take advantage of other university resources around the campus to make sure that the students get the experience of why Yale would be funding this. We're also doing a lot of the experiments, the hands-on work with the brick in the classroom, in the workshop, both just testing crazy ideas out. What if we do this? What if we do that? And how do we feed the hydrogel, and what kind of grade? There's powder, there's beads, there's strands. They're all available for agricultural grade use. And so we are still in that experimental phase of figuring out what grade and the quantity. And once we have this kind of in control, then we'll feed that to the digital model and start working on projections from that. We tried to use the concrete block because the community seems really in love with it. Every other house you see is getting built with this kind of block. So we're remaining open to that, but I think worldwide, when you consider India and Asia and South America, the prevalence of the terracotta brick is more than the concrete block. So I think we will definitely stay with the terracotta block for the rest of the study, but we had to still do diligence, look at that. So one of the things that happened that was really great as we were working with Tec de Monterrey was there is a brick manufacturer that heard about us and said, hey, I can help you. And we visited their plant. They are this organization that is based in Spain, but they have a gigantic plant right outside Mexico City. and they are a highly sustainable operation. They have heat recovery plants. The whole system is circular. You wouldn't believe it. They have community collaborators. They've worked with local community vendors to buy the mud and the raw materials and to make sure they're not depleting in a bad way local community resources for the long term. They gave us a tour of the plant, super excited, and then said, what is it that you need? How can we help? Because we're here to do this. One of the things that they have agreed to do, you recognize some of the people in this picture because I take her with me whenever I can. One of the things they said was, we sell a lot of brick veneer, you know, the half-inch thick brick facades. But in order to sell that, we have to build a full brick with a thicker face. And by the time that we slice off the face, we have that whole leftover brick. We can donate that leftover brick to you because it's already been paid for by the people who are buying the veneer. So we have the brick donated. And because they're only selling the brick veneer, we can determine the kind of cavity that we could use for the brick. I'm sorry, I didn't move forward. We can determine the configuration of the cavity, the depth, the number, and all of that with them. So that's what it's going to be doing this semester, is working with them to create the mold. And now they're an international brick company. They can stock any brick, and as long as it's affordable, anywhere in the country. So that, working with the local communities and this network of the university, another loop tied into making this more feasible. We went back to Hueyapan 2 weeks ago, and we have laid out the footprint for the building in Hueyapan. They're all starting to do the foundations. They're way ahead of us in terms of designing the wall and researching and understanding how much percentage of the wall could have hydrogel. But they're just chomping at the bit. We got to start the foundation. So we're laying it out and starting it. Eventually this semester, we will work on the drip system, and it'll be something off the shelf that is used maybe for your hydroponic gardens in the house that has, you know, calibrated. We want to do a rainwater recovery system, so we will have to incorporate a rainwater tank somewhere in the structure. And right now the students are starting to test out a gravity-fed drip system to feed the hydrogel in the cavity of the brick. We are also modeling the 2 different climates, and we're hoping next spring we will start the mock-up in Argentina in the dry and arid place, now that the kind of elections and the whole economic upheaval put on hold what we were doing before. So that's kind of our work right now. It's very exciting. I go every 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, and I have conferences with them every Wednesday. And that's kind of what takes up most of my time right now. I'm glad that you came to this. Do you have any questions?
Great, right on.
It's crazy, right? So the funding, yeah, go ahead.
How does the hydrogel work, actually? I mean, you mentioned water.
Yes.
It has to interact with water.
So the hydrogel is like Jell-O, and it is a bead or it's a strand. It is a polymer. Some kind of polymer could be biodegradable. Unfortunately, the polymer they're using for irrigation and agricultural uses is not yet, although it's being developed. It remains kind of, if you think when Jell-O gets dry, it shrivels up, and then you add water to it and it fills up, it expands. If we charge the hydrogel, that's what we say, we're putting water in it and it's swelling with water. What we're thinking is that because we're only putting them in the south walls, over the course of the day when the wall gets hot, and some of the temperatures in these places get to 90s, 100s, 110. When the wall gets hot, the water evaporates from the beads, and as the water is evaporating, either by wind or naturally lifting up, that starts to cool down the wall. It's evaporative cooling.
Water to start with.
You have to have water to feed it to the cavity. And the ratio is 1 measure, 1 to 1. The cavity has to be able to hold 2 measures of hydrogel because it needs the same amount of water as hydrogel, the same volume of water as hydrogel. So that's why this semester we're testing the irrigation, the drip system, because we don't want to overcharge it. Otherwise it doesn't evaporate. It holds the water. And we don't want to undercharge it because it won't be as efficient. So it's a lot of testing and, trial and error. Yes?
So do you eventually envision...
Could we have the mic for your questions?
Thank you. Do you eventually envision designing a block that can be, you'll have a mold that you can provide to communities so that they can make their own?
The idea is, most people, yes. We're starting with Nova Ceramic, with the fabricator, to develop a block with a cavity that is feasibly marketable, that they can sell. They know what will sell. They know the size. They know how much they can transport. They know how far it has to go. So that's the first step. Once we achieve a cavity that works for us, and they tell us, yeah, this can go on the market, no problem. Then we work with the local communities in determining, and there's, kind of a good coverage in the country, in determining, is it feasible to copy for a self-builder, right?
So they're spending money right now on the concrete blocks.
Yes, they are.
Spending money on concrete blocks right now, so I guess the goal is to make it the same price or less.
Or less.
Less.
The money they're spending is the federal funding to rebuild this.
So they won't have that
So,
forever.
Exactly. And I think if we can impact the decision-making now, that will be key to making this palatable. Yeah.
So terracotta is basically clay,
Clay, yes.
and it's fired. It's
Yes,
adobe. You got to put it in an oven.
right.
And does that material vary from region to region? I mean, the basic, core material.
Yeah,
So that's another investigation, I would think, as to how each different type of clay is going to have a different convection or a different porosity.
right. Yes, and one of the things that Nova Ceramic is giving us is their database of thicknesses and availability in all their markets, so that we can put that into the digital model and say if it's a clay that's this thick, right? And it's mostly, what worries us is not so much the composition, the exact chemical composition of the clay locally available, but really the thickness of the wall, because that is what's going to make the most for the evaporative cooling in the end. Part of the work is visiting the communities and seeing what they do. I would imagine that if we can achieve a range of temperature drop, that's going to overcome the specific differences in regions. It's not going to be 15 degrees over there, it's going to be 8, but it's still a huge jump. So I'm hopeful that will be. Now, they built a little mock-up in the classroom, and they put the hydrogel in pouches on the side, and thinking, okay, if I were the local community member, how would I do this? And they put it out in the sun, and they tested it, they measured it. We have temperature and humidity sensors, and they measured it over the course of 2 days. The temperature drop was 15 degrees centigrade, just a little like mock-up. It's over the top. I think it's overly unrealistic that it would be that much, but there is a range and a good range. And so I think that will overcome any of these regional differences or the thicknesses or market-driven changes.
So the hydrogel doesn't have to be changed, except, I think you said 5 years or so. Can everybody hear me?
No, that's why we need this.
Yes, but you can hear him?
Oh, right, of course.
Angela needs to
Yes.
hear you.
And the ability of that material to cool a space is going to be dependent on what the environmental conditions are both inside and outside, right?
Right.
Can that be regulated, or is that just a function of how many beads you have and how much water you put in, and whether the water is what temperature before you
Right.
put it in? I guess that's all part of what you're
That's all part of the digital model, the projections that we're going to do in simulating. Okay, this is in the dead of summer. This is the beginning of summer. It's more feasible to use X. And if we can impact, again, I'm always I'm not black and white. Yes, it works, or no, it doesn't work. It's more in what range of conditions does it make what range of benefit? And if we can just impact even minimally, even if we do in a school instead of the whole community, to me, that's already a huge step forward. But you're right, there is 80 different questions now. We're going to publish all this research. We have all the background information on hydrogel. We have all the background information on the socioeconomic impact of the community. We were looking at circular economies. What new jobs? We worked with the School of Economics at Tech last semester. What potential new jobs could this generate? Because, with the changing in agriculture, the changing in landscape, and what they are able to grow and sell, maybe there are new jobs out of this new technology that can make up for the loss of certain commerce from the vegetational changes. So it's very exciting. I will come back, if you will have me, at the end of the year and report back on what happened with the drip system, actually building the mock-ups that we will start this semester. And then the measurements, we're hoping to have the readings with the temperature and humidity sensors for all 4 seasons. That way we can talk data and say, this is what happened in the rainy season, how much evaporative effect we had or couldn't have. And then be able to compare Mexico City, where it's the urban condition, versus kind of the valley in Hueyapan. So there's a lot to learn. I'm glad that I had a chance to introduce this, because it also helped us frame kind of where we're headed.
I have a follow-up to Bob's question. I still can't quite envision what's holding the hydrogel in the cavities. It would seem to me that it would just fall out. I know that's probably naive on my
Yeah.
part, but
So-
that's one question. And the
Yeah.
other is, are they made out of plastic? Is the hydrogel involved with plastic?
No, there's no plastic. It's a natural polymer, and it's a chemical bond. That's why it's harder to biodegrade, but it's like gelatin. If it wasn't chemically bonded, it would be edible. So there's no plastic. In terms of what's holding it up, how we are inserting and replenishing the hydrogel, that's what we're developing right now with the students. We started last semester considering that it could be kind of maybe in a pantyhose tube that gets dropped into, because the bricks, the way they're stacked and the way the cavities line up, that's possible to do. So there could be a tube, kind of like a sausage that gets dropped. There could be perhaps another way of feeding it that could be a diagonal pipe, like a PVC pipe. We have to work with things that are locally available. We can't invent a new tool that nobody will have. And so containing that, one of the professors did a test where they said, if I'm a self-builder, I'm not very efficient in laying the mortar between the bricks. So there will be some mortar residue in the cavity. There always is. It traps all sorts of stuff. Why can't we count just on the nature of the vernacular building technology that is not clean, that is not perfect, and count on the fact that, okay, you guys are going to have to drop more mortar in there in order to drop your hydrogel. And then the next 5 years, we choose different bricks to impact. I think that's part of the questions we're trying to answer now. The way they did it in Catalonia was very different. They actually embedded 2 layers. It made a sandwich that held in canvas, that held the hydrogel in canvas. We tested canvas pouches that could be kind of put on the outside of the brick as a screen. So that's something the family could bring in when it's not hot and keep safely in the house, and then, you know, bring it out, and it's movable. So we're testing the whole range of embedded, inserted, or movable. Good questions. This is a tough audience. Did you have a question? Okay. This is good because I'll go to my students and say, hey, over here.
So I understand this is a cycle, that the hydrogel has its impact by giving off moisture.
Evaporating the water off of the hydrogel cools off.
Corollary, we kind of have to introduce some water to the system
Right,
periodically, every day.
correct. Not every day. The tests the students did, it held the water, not under extreme heat conditions, because we tested this in the classroom, but it held the water for about a week and a half. If we're under extreme conditions, that's part of the simulation that we have to run, is what happens then, and it's part of the observation. So on site, right now, unfortunately, we don't have the hot season coming up. It's starting to get the rainy season, but one of the engineers on the team is thinking we need to simulate the extreme heat and really test out the cycle of how long does it take to recharge, to be needed to be recharged. One of the concerns for introducing water into the wall is that, if you remember, when it gets really hot and humid, even though it's not as hot, but if it's humid, you feel hotter. And so we want to avoid making the inside of the room feel too moist, because then your comfort sense is going to be that it's much hotter. And so balancing the amount of hydrogel, the number of cells, and where they're positioned on the wall, that it's away from where most people would be sitting or the human scale, is something that we're putting into the simulation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good questions.
I noticed that you had the Yale School of Public Health up there too. Are you
Yes.
going to monitor, once this is installed, a possible health impacts for, because heat-related deaths are even up in this country, but certainly symptomatic people don't perform as well. Will you be doing any kind of those studies? Because that would be really interesting to see if you impact people's health as a result.
One of the reasons that they gave us the grant was that the long-term benefit in communities for these chronic illnesses was something we were saying we could start to ameliorate that by cooling down people's houses and schools. And so the School of Public Health has a researcher who is looking at the long-term negative impact of extreme heat in communities. And so he's going to use our findings to say, if we can cool down these communities, the opposite will happen. And so there will be projections, and they will come in once we have a good handle on the benefit. But they have been tracking all along. Our students met with them. And again, they were wanting to impact the connection with the community, interviewing them and researching, because one of the things they're seeing in unrelated research to this one is that communities that are facing these extreme events, like the earthquakes and the volcanoes and the hurricanes, they are a prevalence of mental health issues, and then the perspective on the world about the kind of the deterministic, I don't remember the language, but there is a whole set of social dynamics that they're finding are evident in a lot of communities that live with this extreme heat and these extreme conditions. And that's one thing that they will want to also bring into the research when they jump in.
Great. Cool.
Okay, do we have any other questions?
You can always find me or
Yes.
tell Margaret. There's one behind you.
Oh, right here. Thank you.
How does the water vapor get out of the cavity out into the world is one question. And then the other thought I had is there's going to take some energy to run the drip system. So where does that energy come from?
We're thinking the drip system is going to have to be gravity driven. It's going to have to be siphoned to the top of the wall and drop. That's one of the things we're studying right now, because a lot of the communities don't have power. If they had power, they could buy a fan or cool themselves down some other way, but there's no power. And in this community in Hueyapan, there is no running water. They have a system, these canals, kind of, I don't know if you've been to Machu Picchu or these other ancient indigenous communities, but there's canals, that there is a beautiful spring water from the mountain, and they have a system of canals running through the community. And depending on the season of the year, there's the amount of water. And so in the drier seasons, they actually have a schedule when they share the water. You know, oh, this day it belongs to them, so they block it off and redirect it. So potable water is at a premium depending on the season of the year, and there's no power. So we have to do a gravity-driven system. Maybe we'll collect rainwater. The issue is the loading of the rainwater on the wall and whether we keep a water tank up there. So that's part of the simulation. And the structural engineers are saying, well, we probably can't support a big load, but we're testing the siphon and getting the water to the top of the wall for gravity drip.
The question was,
Here, Bob.
how does the water get from the cavity into the space?
Could you repeat it, talk right?
How does the water get from the cavity into the space to cool it?
Hopefully the water does not get into the space, because we don't want the humidity in the space. What we want is the water to evaporate. And how does
Evaporating to the outside. then.
evaporating to the outside? So
Aha.
yeah, that's why the bricks that had a dual cavity were important to us, because it separates the, here we go, the dual cavity that keeps the majority of the brick inboard that is dry, and the outside portion of the brick would be where we insert the hydrogel. And hopefully that's the hottest part that is on the outside facing. Yeah. It's very technical, you guys, I'm sorry.
To clarify, that image is a little misleading because it's vertical, right? That
Yes.
block would be laid
Would
horizontal.
be laid horizontal.
Stacked,
But you
so that
still
the
have,
cavities line up.
but you still have the outside face with a smaller cavity, and the inside face that would be dry.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And we don't want water inside the room. Yeah.
You have some architects here who are very
glad.
asking very difficult questions.
audience.
But you can answer them, and we thank you so much, Celia.
And we don't have final answers. We're counting on the simulations. We have to stay true to the scientific method. You know what? We have an idea. Let's build it. Let's test it in the digital model and just see whether the digital twin and the reality actually match. So we can't wait to actually build the physical mock-up and then compare the two. I welcome all your questions, because they only help us improve what we're doing.
I think it's just amazing to be sitting here in Brantford and thinking about this project in Mexico, and giving so much thanks that all the brain power that we have in the Yale area is helping people who desperately need it. So thank you so much, Celia. And thanks for sharing this.
You're welcome. And this is my daughter. Oh, wait. Oh, I just, oh, where is it? That's my daughter. There she is. She comes with me on some of the trips. She's in high school, so.
Great.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you for coming. Be well.
Thanks. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.
For all your good work.
We'll look forward.